Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk about exceptional human experiences. Sometimes they're called near-death experiences. Now, research tells us that roughly 5% of the population has had a near-death experience. Now, given the United States population is about 331 million people, that means over 16 million people in the United States alone have had a near-death experience. Yet, we still have doubters. We still have people who dismiss a near-death experience as a side effect of medication or operating room lights or hallucinations. Sometimes I hear it's witchcraft and worse. 16 million episodes in the United States alone cannot be a coincidence. We're going to look into this today. My guest today is John Mathis. John has had a near-death experience. He is also a clinical researcher who has spent years researching and investigating this phenomenon. So we're going to get into this today. John, welcome to Near-Death Experiences.
Thank you very much, Frank.
John, give our viewers an overview of your background, where you were born, what happened as you were growing up, some of the things you discovered as a child. You found you had these gifts. Share that with us.
I was born in Indianapolis, but grew up in a farm town about 20, 30 minutes outside of Indianapolis called Brownsburg. We had 2 stoplights and a flashing light, and they closed high school early so that we could go to the opening of the Kmart. So it was a big deal.
Yes.
Marching bands and everything. But I went to a Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, Catholic college, deviated for a little bit, went to Purdue for a couple of years. But other than that, the Catholics kind of had their way with me. So I probably shouldn't say it like that. I went to Catholic school for 12 years. Let's just.
Yeah, we got to clarify a little more now.
Yeah, let's just leave it like that. So I went to Marian University in Indianapolis on a partial scholarship. I was a music major and English major at the same time, but music was what got me through school. So I ended up being a bass baritone soloist, was singing opera at 17, was singing German for my German grandfather at 6.
Wow.
So just language has kind of been part and parcel. By the time I graduated my senior year of college, I was singing in 6 languages and was performing for a couple of different opera companies and was a church soloist for a couple of churches in town. So I actually thought I was going to be an opera singer. So that's why I was so heavily into the languages and I mean, you can take a look at me. I'm not exactly a svelte, tiny guy. I also got hit on or maybe prospected by Jimmy Johnson. The NFL Combine was being held in Indianapolis at the same time as a job fair. And so Jimmy Johnson invited me to walk on for the Cowboys and give a tryout. At the time, I was 6'5" and 320 with a 20-inch neck. Yikes. So, yeah, not a dainty demoiselle by any means. So opera kind of worked for my physique. But yeah, so I went to college, got out of college, had a music and English degree, and found out that Indiana had laid off about 14,000 teachers and teaching assistants. So I didn't have a job. So I volunteered at a hospital and got involved with medicine and realized that it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. So that's how I made the conversion from being a opera singer to being a cancer nurse. So during that transition period, I got really, really sick, and I thought it was just a case of steroids, of like pneumonia of on steroids. And it got to a point where I finally went to the local doc in the box, and he's got this white look on his face. And he said, "You've got whiteout in all 5 lobes," which is I've got fluid in all 5 lobes of my lungs. So he's like, "Yeah, you need to get to the doctor." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll handle that." So I went to my diabetes doctor and said, "Yeah, here's this report I got from the doc in the box." And then she turned white and she says, "I'm directly admitting you. You will drive right here to the hospital." Okay, sure. So I went home.
Instead of going directly to the hospital.
Exactly. Made myself a nice English breakfast, eggs and bacon and coffee. And because I knew the coffee's going to be crap once I got in the hospital, having worked in a hospital. So once I left home, and the next thing I knew, I was in the hospital. I have no idea how I got there. I don't know if I drove or if I drove myself. But I ended up being intubated, ended up being medically induced coma for 14 days, was hospitalized for a total of 28 days. And it was during that experience that I had my near-death experience, and that was 2005.
Mhm. Go ahead, tell us what happened. What was that like?
It was a very peaceful vacation, actually. I told people God put me in timeout because I wasn't listening. But yeah, so I mean, clinically speaking, so I have a left brain, right brain thing. It's like the left brain has to have its say so that it'll shut up. So I had bronchitis and pneumonia at the same time, had whiteout in all 5 lobes. I had an oxygen saturation of 65%, which when you're at 90% is when they put you on the nasal cannula thing. 65%, they don't know why I was even conscious. So they intubated me, and then everything went to hell. It turns out I had ARDS, acquired respiratory distress syndrome, and the lungs basically go into shock. And when they go into shock, they dump fluid to kind of flush out whatever's in there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have bronchitis and pneumonia, and then your lungs start dumping fluid in on itself, you basically drowned. And
Right.
that's what's going on right now with COVID, with those patients that are you see on the respirators and ventilators. They're literally drowning in their own fluids, and that's what I was going through.
Mm.
The weird thing is, though, is that with ARDS cases, about half the people who get it die from it because other organ systems start shutting down. So my lungs shut down, my kidneys shut down. I blew up to about 420 pounds. I had so much fluid on board because my kidneys were shut down that it started weeping out of my skin.
Mm-hmm.
I even had blisters on my eyeballs. The fluid was just everywhere. And then I had a heart rhythm and started throwing PVCs, or preventricular contractions. And they're like, he's gone, he's circling the drain.
Right.
But then I had an undiscovered birth defect. And you have a battery at the top of your heart, a battery at the bottom, an SA and an AV node. And your atrial heart can, go without that for a while. Your ventricle, not so much. And so when my ventricle and atrial shut down, all of a sudden this little cluster decided to turn on. And so I had a steady ventricular rate of about 20 to 30 beats per minute. And then everything came back online again. So they threw a bunch of oxygen at me, they ventilated me, they gave me all sorts of tests, everything, so obscure that they were looking at SARS and Legionnaire's disease. They never did find out what was wrong with me. But everything turned off. I needed a couple weeks rest, and then everything turned back on again. But it was during that time frame, I'm outside of my body. I'm watching the room. I'm seeing who's coming and going. I'm keeping track of the nurses. I follow them out of my room, out of ICU, to the nurses station to kind of hear what they're talking about. And at the time, I was a nursing student. I wasn't a nurse yet. So part of me was kind of curious, what are they going to do with me, and what kind of approaches will they take? And it was very dispassionate. There was no worry. There was no concern. If anything, there was a degree of amusement that all this was going on.
Mhm.
But I went through that traditional type near-death experience in the sense of there was a tunnel of light. Oh, I wonder what's here. And then I go through that tunnel and then I see a brighter light. And I'm like, oh, what's that over there? And then I had a feeling that that brighter light was actually a person or a thing or a consciousness.
Mhm.
And so I thought, well, who's this? And once you get over there, words don't work. It's everything is thought and emotion. And so as soon as I had the curiosity of, I wonder what that is over there, I was right next to it. And so I couldn't tell if it was a little bitty speck the size of an eraser head, or if it was, as big as a planet, because it was all white. I had no reference points.
Mhm.
But as soon as I got there and talking to it, I said, what are you? And it said, I'm everything.
Mm.
I'm like, okay. And again, kind of chagrined, like, oh, that's an interesting response. Your business card must be huge. And so with that amusement thought, I got a wave of amusement back at me. Like, oh, this person thinks like I do, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then this like little silver thread came out from it and connected to me. And then it was just like going from lighting a match in a dark room to turning on a spotlight. And so all this data started coming in and all these connections and things. And the traditional part of it was I saw grandparents, I saw great aunts and uncles, I saw a pet from when I was a child. I even saw some patients of mine that had passed, a college acquaintance, just all these different connections. And as I kind of stood back and looked at it, it looked like a snowflake where I'm at the center of that. And then every branch off of that was a tangent. So it's like college, but then, okay, who did you all contact in college that you had a connection to? Then those were off branches from that one connection. So when you stand back and look at it, it looks like a crystal snowflake.
Really?
It's like, wow, that's really cool. And so then I went into the snowflake and did more exploration. What are all these connections? And it's almost like It's a Wonderful Life in the sense of you get to see how you affected other people, but from their perspective as opposed to yours.
Mm.
And so, I helped some guy change a tire on the side of the road. But then I found out later that, again, in this state, I found out later that he was a minister. And he went and preached the following Sunday about the kindness of strangers. And so I got to see that ripple effect, and I got to see that in several situations. So then I came back to this entity and I'm like, wow, that was really cool. And I said, what else have you got? And then there was like this universal feeling of, oh boy, he gets it. He wants more. And so it went from being a spotlight to being like a magnesium fire. And the snowflake got, I won't say instantly, but it quickly filled out with so many other nodes and connections that it
Mhm.
almost looked like a ball of fire. So then I go back in and explore again. And this is where I see like superfluous or ancillary stuff. I saw my dog and I saw a friend of a friend and things again that you don't ordinarily associate with a near-death thing.
Right.
But it was like A Wonderful Life, like all these things and connections that you have made, you don't know what you have done until you see it from their perspective.
Mhm.
Um, but then I explored more the distal roots, and I'm like connecting with plants and trees and um, things that were both on Earth and not on Earth. And so I came back and I'm like, oh my God, I get it now. You're trying to tell me everything is energetically connected to everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like this huge voice in my head, and it's like, he gets it, he gets it. And then I turn around, and the being is no longer just a whiteness with a silver thread. It is now the comedian George Carlin.
Oh my goodness.
Now here's where, when I go to like to do traditional talks about the near-death experience, this is where I lose about, I don't know, a good chunk of people. And the reason is that the near-death experience for some folks is so intimate, it's so sacred
Mm-hmm.
that they don't want to associate someone who gave us the 7 words you can't say on TV to be connected to their holy experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever I run into that friction, I was like, look, you got to understand, the messenger dictates how much dissonance you get. Because if you know me and my personality, if I saw Jesus or Buddha or Kuan Yin or, some angel waving a sword around, I'd be like, I must have had some mushrooms, or I ate bad sushi at a gas station somewhere, or, something like that. It's like, this is not real. But for some reason, seeing George Carlin was like, this is pretty freaking cool. Oh, and the other sidebar is that this was in 2005, and I believe George passed away in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So he was still alive here on Earth. So then it begs the question, well, who was I really talking to?
Right.
And so I started thinking of the movie Contact, where Jodie Foster sees her father, but it's not really her father, and she
Mm-hmm.
knows that. And the being even says, it's kind of like, look, this is for your comfort level, and this is how it's been done for millions of years. Just roll with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, it's like, I don't know if this is or isn't George, but I'm not going to waste my time wondering about that. I want to be in that moment. So show me stuff. And so that's what he did. He was showing me fractals, and how fractals actually are one of the building blocks of the universe. They're showing me how emotionally things convert from energy to matter based upon how much energy emotionally you put into it. And that kind of falls into something I learned back with my Silva training, and also with metaphysics. Lynn McTaggart talks about, I think her latest book was A Power of Eight, but before that was the intention experiment, where if you get a bunch of people together focusing their intentions on things, then you start making things happen. And Silva talks about it where it was either in Philly or in DC. When the temperature goes up, the violence in the city goes up. And so they got all these people to meditate and think about calm and sweet and harmony. And the heat went up and the crime rate went down. And not only was that happening then, but there was also a lingering after effect. So it's like, once they stopped meditating, it didn't stop the change. The change still kept going on and propagating for a little while, kind of like
Mm-hmm.
ripples in a pond.
Right. Wow. That is so interesting. The when we spoke, when you talked about just a moment ago that everything's interconnected, and we spoke, you mentioned something that your term was an energy architect, and that the outcome of
Mm.
life is predetermined, yet we still have free will. Now, it seems like we have a contradictory thing here. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's something I'm still kind of working out, because so if you take away the template of George Carlin and just go back to, there is this thing out there, and if you don't have the lexicon, the quick and dirty would say, I saw God.
Right.
Well, why would you say God? Well, it was a being of light and supreme intelligence. Well, maybe there's something out there that's been around for a million years, and they're outside of time, so they don't age. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe we, in our limited meat suits, say, oh, that must be God, because we had no other frame of reference.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to have another frame of reference because during my near death investigations and research that I did for a few years, I discovered that there is a PTSD treatment or template that can be applied to people who have had a near-death experience to help them reintegrate. So I then took it upon myself to go to other subgroups within society to see, would this PTSD template work for other people who've had dissociative experiences? So I was living in Florida at the time, and there was a group up in Tampa called MUFON, and it's a mutual UFO network. And so I took what I thought would be a good treatment plan for people who have PTSD related to a near-death experience, and saw if that treatment plan would work for people who have been, in their minds, have been abducted. And there's many parallels between people who have had the abduction experience and have also had a near-death experience. They end up, changing their lives, changing their religion, changing their marriage, changing their jobs, changing where they live, change. It's kind of like do a Control-Alt-Delete on their entire life. But I feel like that's not the question you asked me. You get me talking about this stuff, and I'm all over like a frog in wonder.
It's very interesting. It seems that you told me a story that you interacted with Lou Pearlman.
The architect.
Yes. And you interacted with Lou Pearlman.
Okay, so
the
architect comes in because in my near-death experience, I met this George Carlin character. But if you take away that persona, what is this thing? Is it God? Is it source? Is it an extraterrestrial with 1 million years experience on us? I don't know. And I prefer to be in a state of not knowing, because if I give it a title, then my brain settles down. Oh, we're going to call this thing God. And then I don't worry about it anymore, because my brain is now satisfied because it has an answer. It has a tag and a file system it can hang on to. But if I deliberately choose not to do that, then that means my brain still keeps working on it and keeps chewing on it. And that's one of the things they teach you in remote viewing, is that you want to not come in with an answer. You want to come in with, what do you see, hear, smell, taste, touch? Don't decide what it is, but tell me its attributes. So I applied that training to the architect. I had ketamine therapy in 2018 for depression. And while I was being administered IV ketamine, then there's a steady beep, and the nurse is taking notes and all this sort of stuff next to me. But at the same time, I'm not in the room, and I'm talking with this source thing again. And it was like, okay, I know I'm not dead or dying, because part of my consciousness is still in the room, and I can still hear the oxygen. I can still hear the beep of my pulse. So I know that's okay. So it gave me the confidence to explore more into, what is this source? Who are you? What is this? And I also have encountered this entity when I do remote viewing, but when I am the one directing where I go, then it's called astral projection. They're both out-of-body experiences, but the out-of-body experience of astral projection is basically, I go where I want to go, I see what I want to see, and I don't require the veracity of having someone taking notes and being a handler, which is more of a remote viewing paradigm. So when I astral project, I have bumped into this source character. During my near-death experience, I was my first introduction to this source character. And then during ketamine therapy, I encountered the source character again. So in these 3 different rings, there's a Venn diagram that contains this thing. And so during my second ketamine session, I asked him, who are you? And so the visual I had was a guy making boxes, and they're very space age looking, very smooth, and like, maybe made out of a titanium silver kind of thing. But he's just like grabbing things, and boom, there's a box, and then there's a box, and then there's a box, and then there's a box. But then I look at him, and he looks like friggin' Santa Claus. He's a big, jolly guy. He's got a big smile on his face, and he's just happy as a clam making these boxes. And I'm like, who are you? And in the context in my head was, I've seen you in these 3 different tangents. Why am I seeing you? Who are you to be in all 3 of these places? And he says, I'm the architect. Okay, like that's supposed to explain everything. And of course it does not. And it's going to beg more questions. What are you doing? He goes, oh, I'm making reality. What? He goes, okay, well, I'm making potential realities.
Ah,
And I'm like, okay, well, the first thing was, well, then what about free will? I thought free will was some gift to humans that other species and things don't have. He goes, oh, you've got free will. He says, but you're on a linear time track. I'm outside of time. So I know what's going to happen, but I make all possible potentials. I'm like, okay. He says, but they each have a logical thread. You can't be driving in your car and then the next second later be laying on your couch watching TV. There's a series of steps that have to happen.
correct.
And so I create all the potential realities that will lead you there. But as you move from one box to the next potential, then all of the other potential realities that the architect has created, then they collapse. So it's like potential waiting for you to make a choice. And then once you make a choice, it's almost like this huge plume is in front of you, and then it's like tapered off behind you as all of them collapse because you've already made the next decision, the next decision, the next decision.
Mm-hmm.
And my thought was like, wow, you've got to be really freaking tired. Potential, because I know how crazy I am. I'll start doing dishes, then I remember I got something going on in the laundry, and then it's like, the ADD turns on and like squirrel, and I'm, doing all sorts of things. So I must keep my guy pretty busy. But at the same time, there's a logical linear flow from our perspective, but he's outside of time. So, he knows what we're doing 10 days, or he knows the potential of what we're doing 10 days or 10 years from now.
And so it's like there's a path that's set up. You make a free will choice. It eliminates these options, and then it opens up this path. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Wow.
And now that you understand it, let me throw some mud at it.
Okay.
So the female who would become my wife and then ex-wife, I had an opportunity in my life to become a professional musician, as in like Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, 98 Degrees, that strata. If I would have chosen that path, Lou Pearlman was the guy who was putting together this group. Lou Pearlman's personal driver would have been our driver for events, and our driver's girlfriend would become my wife / ex-wife. So if I would have chosen that pathway, then there's a potential that we would have connected. I didn't choose that pathway. I chose instead to go to college. I was the first generation in my family to go to college, and it was a big deal in all my life from grade school on. Just get a college degree. My dad never even got a high school degree. So a college degree was just going to open up the world. The world's your oyster. College degree. I don't care what it's in. Just get a college degree.
Just get one.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I'll go get one. So when the opportunity to become a professional musician presented itself, I said, no, I want to go to college instead. So I went to college, went to Purdue, 2 years, didn't pan out, came back home, tried out for Fiddler on the Roof, ended up with a scholarship at this college. And the following year, 2 years later, I met this girl there who would become my wife / ex-wife. So it's like there was somewhere in the Akashic records or the cosmic Costco or wherever it is in a pre-meat suit state, when you're selecting, okay, this time around, what am I going to learn? Or this time I want to try this, but I want to try it with this degree of difficulty or with different, it's almost like a video game, different characters or different settings or different degree of the difficulty. No matter which way I would have chosen, that node was going to connect.
Mm-hmm.
So in one way, I still had the free will because I could have gone either direction. But there's also the non-free will in the sense that I was going to meet her regardless. And that was part of my pre-staging selection out of, again, the cosmic Costco.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, there is free will, but there's also, I've heard Carolyn May say that we have soul contracts. And, we make these agreements prior to stepping into our meat suit that these are the things that we're going to cross off our list, or we're going to learn, or we're going to get better at, kind of solve that karmic inequality sometimes that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a hybrid of both in the sense, and I guess it's free will from both a soul's perspective, because you've asked, or you've gone into the cosmic Costco and you've said, this is what I want to learn. So that's free will outside of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you step into a meat suit and now you're into the time stream of linear time.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to use this corporeal, basically your body is like a bioelectric interface to the quantum universe.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you are meditating on things or fixated on things or investing your emotions into things, that is you reaching out into the quantum space and saying, this is what I want to make happen. And again, kind of falling back to what we talked about earlier, if you get with enough people who can focus their energies and focus their intentions on that thing, then it's easy for that thing to manifest, because it's getting all of these signals from different people out into the ether, out into the quantum space.
Mm-hmm.
And it picks up that energy and says, oh, we need to become this. And so the going from energy to manifestation
Mm-hmm.
is a result of us programming that, or reaching it out there with our mind until it becomes into physical space, and then our brain gets it.
I see. When we spoke,
And
you
I'm not
talked-
high, or I'm not on mushrooms. This is all stuff that's just been in my head.
This is interesting stuff. I've been doing a lot of reading on this, and one of the things that intrigued me when I spoke to you prior was you're saying the architect. Think of the architect like a director in a movie or a play,
Mm-hmm.
and according to, I even got the quote from Shakespeare that you said, all the world's a stage and all men and women are merely players.
Players.
So we come in, we go out, we have a number of different roles, number of different choices, but in the end, we already know what the end of the play is going to be. Correct?
Yeah. So the metaphor that I use when I talk to folks, I said, it's like a community theater. Your family is your soul family. And so as a soul, maybe this time around, I'm going to be your dad. Previously, I was your brother. Another kind of curiosity. So my father and I both have the same birthday, November 5th. We're just 24 years apart. In a previous lifetime, we were twin brothers, which we would have the same birthday then too.
That's right.
So I think that's why there's like this George Carlin thing kind of running through who I am and what I do. And there's these little breadcrumbs. So one of the things I've also done is I've done past life regression.
Mm-hmm.
And I spontaneously found 4, and then I've uncovered a total of 12 at this point. And as I go back and look at them, they each have just a little piece of something that I recognize as me now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what is that? Is that just me just screwing with me and saying, if he looks back at time and just looks for this stuff, he's going to find this, and this is going to be funny? Or is it something that is more scientific because when we talk about neuroplasticity, and what we thought was fixed isn't really fixed. And then we talk about genetic memory, and what got my attention on that was that if someone does so the case study I'm referring to is a young woman, like in her early 30s, required a heart and lung transplant. And she was on the list, on the list, on the list. And then finally she got the surgery. And after the surgery, they were out doing follow-up questions, and she was talking about how her kids were teasing her because she's such a video gamer now. And then she started thinking, that's not me. That's so totally not me. I'm not that kind of person. And then she started looking at other things and little idiosyncrasies. And one of the other ones was she gets this huge craving for chicken nuggets. And she was like a vegetarian. And so it's like, where is this coming from? So a couple of years go by, and finally she decides she wants to know who her donor was. And the family had put the thing out there, if this person ever asks, it's okay to reach out to us. And so whoever that intermediary is put the two of them together, and she found out that she received her heart and lung from a 19-year-old kid who was into video games like most kids, but he had this huge thing about chicken McNuggets, and it's like the only thing they can get this kid to eat. And so somehow the predilections from a 19-year-old male ended up in a 30-something-year-old female. And she had no knowledge to have brought that across. So it wasn't a psychological thing. So it has a real head scratcher. And when you start talking to surgeons that do major organ transplants, you kind of see them begrudgingly, like you see them evaluating you, whether it's like, do I want to tell you this story or not? Well, I've got a couple of surgeon friends and a couple of PA surgical friends and it's like, when I lay out 2 or 3 of the stories that I've got and actually refer to, it's in the Lancet or it's in the, MIT annuals. Then they kind of, I've kind of heard something about that. And then you get a couple of drinks in them and, get some in vino veritas going on. It's like, yeah, there's this one and I don't talk about it. And so it's out there and it's potential. And again, it's one of those things again, where it's like the world will manifest your potential if you put enough energy and belief into it, or you circle up the wagons with enough of your friends of a like mindset and make it happen.
Well, John, this has been amazing, and we're just about out of time. Is there any last thought you want to leave with the viewers around the world here?
Yeah. So the earth is a playground. It is a school. It is a multi-dimensional lab experiment. And your awareness will dictate how much of it you get to see. And when you see our politics and you see our health care situation, as an actor, you should be emotionally stimulated by these things. As a director, you want to see your characters be stimulated and see those characters grow and manifest so that they're not a two-dimensional actor, that they really do have a backstory and they're more robust and it's a learning experience. And if you buy into the reincarnation aspect, then what is 50, 60, 80, 90 years of life when you are eternal?
Correct.
You're just borrowing a meat suit.
Mhm.
and you've lost yourself as an actor type thing. You've lost yourself in the role.
Mhm.
You've lost yourself in the role of whatever meat suit you're wearing. But you may occasionally have these disassociative experience, like a near-death experience, like fasting, meditation, pharmacodynamics, whatever it takes for you to kind of separate the two. Within yourself, you are both the actor and the director.
Mhm.
And if you can occasionally step outside of the actor and just, instead of responding to all the barrage of things that are going on, come up to the 10,000 foot level and think as a director. What is this actor experiencing? What are these emotions supposed to teach? How are they going to embolden this actor for the next thing?
Mhm.
That's what's going on right now. If you could just step outside of fear just for a moment to see what the director sees, it will make your life as the actor much more tolerable, because then you have the answer why. Why is this happening? Why am I going through this?
Mhm.
It'll
I
help.
love that. That is great. Staying engaged, staying involved, and looking at things. Well, we can't see three-dimensional, but looking at things from a higher viewpoint. I love it. It's wonderful. As I mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, we're just about out of time. I want to thank John for sharing this amazing story. This is one of the most interesting conversations we've had. And ladies and gentlemen, no matter what life throws at you, and as you heard just now, life's going to throw a lot at you. But when it does, please do three things. Look up, get up, never ever give up. Keep moving forward. Better times and better people will come into your life. If you'd like more information about John, you can contact him at his website or contact me. I will make sure he gets it. And you can see this show on Roku TV or on my YouTube page, Frank Sakari. I will also send links to John, and he'll post it to all the places that he puts out his information and his data. So one last thing, ladies and gentlemen, let me leave you with this. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, John showed us where many of those rocks are. Join me again next week. We'll have another life-altering event. Thank you.